Hey guys, welcome back to the second half of our custom e-fuel install. So in the first half of the video, we covered wiring in the fuel pump, relay, fuse, inertia switch. That's all pre-wired into the factory fuse box, so it looks like it's a factory option. The only thing that kind of looks out of place is the fuel inertia switch, but we're going to tidy that up a little bit, put some lume on it, make it look nice once the finishing touches are done there. However, on this half, we're going to go ahead, show you where we're going to be putting our pump and our filters, and then also where we're going to be routing our lines in the valley of the engine. So the routing the lines of the valley of the engine is going to be a little bit different than, say, what we did on Brent's truck. It's going to be very similar, but very different at the same time. However, it's something that we do a little bit differently since we're using the PTFE lines. So follow along in this video, and we'll show you what we're going to be doing to get this truck running with its new e-fuel setup. So the first thing we're going to cover here, we're going to be under the truck, and we're going to be mounting our filter bases. All right. So you can see I have a nice little bracket here. This is made out of aluminum. And what I do is I tap all of these. I drill the holes out, tap them, make sure we have a thick enough material so that it's a lot easier to install these. You can install them a lot lower. So I'm going to show you where we're going to put these along with the pump and show you how we get them tucked up under the truck about as far as you can possibly get them, because even though these are the longer filters, you still can only see about this much of it, which is great. So you can see here that we have one of the filter bases mounted already, along with the pump. The way we worked this out was we're going to have a filter on each side of this pump, and we're going to have some elbow fittings. And we did do some clearance checking here because we do have a little bit of a tight spot here, but the fitting does still go on here pretty easily, which is good. But we're using 3 different brackets here, and we're going to go ahead and keep using the 3 different brackets, because what we want to do is if we have to service anything, you can just remove one piece or another piece. And we used nice thick aluminum for these, so you have nice weight savings and it's a little bit easier to handle. And we went ahead and got all this stuff mounted up here. Now we did have to drill some holes in the cross member, but when you're doing something like this and you want your filters up as high as possible, you have to worry about your clearance up top here. Let me grab the light for you. You have to worry about your clearance up here. Now I can still get my finger in between the body and the top of this base, but this is about as high as you can mount these filters without having to have clearance issues. So if you're using the Napa style bases, they don't sit up as high as, say, like Marty's, but you do have that top piece here, but it is fully secured. It's pretty strong. It actually moves the cross member when I pull on it. So we went ahead and did it this way. We still have to mount this filter base over here. And then once we do that, we can go ahead and work on getting all of our plumbing installed. Now, the only thing that we're going to be running into here is we're going to have a lot of elbows, a lot of fittings, because we don't want anything to get into this drive shaft. All right. So we do have some clearance issues, but these aren't really clearance issues because this never moves this way unless you literally blow this universal off or break the drive shaft and it comes whipping over here. But this should not get into the drive shaft at all. But we still are going to be doing the same things that we had done on Brent's truck, which is we're going to be tying into these lines. So we're going to go ahead and get this filter base put in here, and then we're also going to start getting into these lines. And once we get this all figured out, we can go ahead up to the top of the engine and start getting everything torn apart there. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get this base installed. Now, something I want to show you is you can kind of see that this base is on an angle. So it doesn't match the bracket here. Now, the reason we did that is because this bracket actually starts to fall as it gets closer to this frame rail. So you want your filter to be, vertical. So that's the idea behind doing what I did there. Okay, so that makes this filter base so the filter hangs straight down instead of sitting here and it would be at an angle, which is what you don't want. So it's a little hard to see. Kind of got limited capabilities here with the video, but we're going to go ahead and get this bolted on here. Once we get that bolted on, we're going to start messing with getting the fuel lines done on the frame rail here. So we have both of our bases mounted here, and just going to give you a visual. So our frame, bottom of frame, is about right here on this filter. So the only thing you can see hanging down is the actual separator drain, which is exactly what we want. And we do have adequate clearance, which I know you can't see real well, but we have adequate clearance here for your fuel pump here. So that's great. So we're going to go ahead and start getting everything kind of plumbed here. Now we're going to go ahead and spin these back off because they're just going to be in the way. So this is our setup here. It's pretty strong, which is great, which is what we want, you know. So we're going to go ahead and start cutting into the lines over here on the rail and getting everything plumbed in. Now we may end up having to take these bases back off to get our fittings in, but we need to figure out what needs to go where before, you know, we start saying, hey, this is exactly where this needs to go. So we're going to start messing with that. So we have our return line and our feed line. All right, the feed line's on the bottom here. Now, I may not have to replace this line here, which would be fantastic. So we're actually going to take this line off of here, make a nice big mess, because that's what's going to happen. I've actually got another line here so that I can stick it on there so that it doesn't run all over the frame, and it actually will drain down into the pan here. I'm going to go ahead, get this permanent clamp off of here, and then just stick this hose on and then try to bring all that fuel down into the container here. Now here's the fun part. So you got to watch now, because this will siphon right out of the tank. It'll empty it completely out. So I'm probably going to have to put a plug in here. Okay, so we don't have any fuel coming out of the line, but we may. So I'm just going to leave that on there for now. And I'm going to go ahead and get a plug for this. So I actually just stuck it on the other end of the pump there. Hopefully it won't push back through the pump, but it shouldn't. So we have our filter bases here. The front half of the filter base, so these are the front two ports here. So this one and this one in the front. These are your ins. The back ones are your out. So the line we took off down here will come to the front on this side. Will come out the back over here. Now that'll run to the back of the pump over here. And then out the front of the pump will come over to either this side or this side. Probably be this side, and then we'll come out probably on this side as well, back to our line. We're going to go ahead and get started on getting all these lines situated. Now, I went ahead and pre-Tefloned all of our plugs here, you can see. So we're going to go ahead and start installing our plugs. So I know that we're going to be using the front one on this side here. So we're going to go ahead and get this threaded in.
We know we're going to be using the back on this side, not the front one.
And then we're probably going to be using the insides on both of these. However, if we're going to be doing that, we can't use an elbow and an elbow. We'll have to use an elbow and a straight. So we're going to make sure that we can get the straight one in here and make sure that it'll actually clear this housing, which it doesn't look like it's going to. So we may not be able to use both ports on this side, because these are the fittings that I have bought, and I showed you these in the previous video. So as you can see here, if you wanted to do something like this, this fitting is going to interfere with the other fitting beside it. So we can't necessarily say do this because we won't be able to spin the other one in. So now we need to figure out how we need to get back to here. So we need to just take a length of hose and we'll just route it to, we got this one on here now. So you can see that this works really, really well. And we may be able to even take it and run it down and around the back. So we probably take the one out on the back side over here, run it above the pump to here. It'll just be a little bit smoother of a process. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to plug this other one on the back. Because we'll be using the front one for the in. So it'll come up and around and go in. So we'll plug this side in the front. So now that we have figured out what ports we're going to be using, we can go ahead and start threading all of our fittings in. So I'm pretty sure that we're going to be hitting the cab when we start to put this guy in. So I have one of these that's not Teflon for testing purposes. So this one doesn't hit here, okay? But I think it hits over here, yeah. So we'll have to either pull down on this, which might give us enough. Yeah, so we can pull down on that. We won't have to end up actually loosening that up. So we'll go ahead and get this guy started. We'll grab a crescent wrench to do that with. Now you might ask, why am I using a crescent wrench for this, okay? So this crescent wrench is nice and short, which is what I want it to be. And the jaws are a little bit longer. So this is about where we want this fitting to come out. And in reality, if this line that we took off back here is just too short, we're going to go ahead and just put a new piece of line in from here to the selector. It's not a big deal because I would rather have this be looped down under this cross member than ride up on it. So we're just going to do a little test fit here in a little bit, but I'm going to go ahead and start getting all these other fittings put in. Now we're going to have this one looking forward so it can loop out and around. Now the reason we're doing this instead of shooting it back is because we don't want to have a really tight bend right here. So we'll take this out and around and we'll loop it in with this hose and bring it back this way. That way that they aren't chafing and you don't have any tight bends. Now the hose we're using will do a 3-inch bend radius. So it'll make that bend, but I don't want to put the stress on the fitting. So that's where that one has to go. Now we can go ahead and get our one installed up front here. Same thing, we're going to have this one go forward because we're going to take these two are going to connect here from here to here, and then this side will go out to the rail. Now we're going to be using these types of lines on the pump here. Now these are used. I pulled these off of some other trucks that we had here, and they are OEM quick connects. You can buy these new from Dorman or anywhere like that. So you can get these from like Marty's, but these are quick connects. All right. So we're not going to use a 90 here. We'll use a straight one up here, but this 90 is going to fit on the back there, and they are appropriately sized for the correct hose, which is great. But before we go into getting all that done, I'm going to go ahead and try and get this line set onto the new fitting. So you can see it doesn't quite make it. So we're going to have to go ahead and replace this line from the selector to here because it just isn't going to make it, which is terrible, but it is what it is. If you don't want to do that, you could always splice in the middle of this line, cut this line and then splice it, trying to minimize our connections here. However, if I can't get that elbow off back there, which looks just like this guy here, I'll go ahead and splice that in, but I'm going to try my best to not do that. All right, so I went back here and messed with this a little bit. Getting back to that is going to be a pain right now. So I think what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and splice into the existing line here. And whenever the time comes, if we drop this tank, we'll go ahead and just replace that line and get rid of the splice that we're going to put in here. So we're going to go ahead and get everything set up here because this is probably going to make a mess. And like I said, we're just going to have a short little guy here. And go ahead and get that spliced in. So we're going to leave this guy a little bit long so that it has some room to move here. And then we'll go ahead and cut it up here. Use our cable cutters again, since they work really, really well for this. Hopefully we don't make a mess. Get our hose clamp put on here. We'll go ahead and tighten all those up now. All right, so we gave that a good tug there. And nice and tight, shouldn't be any leaks here. So our next step is going to be go ahead and get our line ran from this side. Like I said, we'll go ahead and we'll just follow this line down and around over to here. So we have our elbow put on here. Light's probably going to die on me here, but go ahead and this will snap on here. So this is actually free floating now, all right? So we're going to take this around, and I had said previously, we're going to go ahead and do a little bit of a loop on it and go ahead and put it in here. Now the reason we're doing the loop is because if you put it straight down here, it could actually cause a problem with this fitting here because there's a tight clearance, but it also keeps this hose up out of the way. So we got a little mark on here. We'll go ahead and cut it. Then we'll go ahead and put our hose clamp on and slide it on there. So that's that line there. Now we just have to do this line to here. Once again, we have our straight push connect. Clips in. We'll give this guy a little bit of a loop. Now we could have taken this line to this side over here like this, but like I had said previously, we went ahead and put this guy in over here. Now I could have put a straight fitting out the side. Now the only reason I didn't do that is because I was worried about the fitting in this frame, so we might have an interference with the line in the frame and we didn't want that. So this line will do a 3-inch bend radius, and we can always push this up a little bit because that'll be tightening it, and get this hose to point up a smidge, and that'll reduce our radius on this hose. But we'll go ahead and get a little mark here. Get our hose clamp put on and get this guy put on here. Now, I don't like the way that hose clamp faces, so thankfully there's enough give in there. We can flip this hose clamp around, push it back on. So we have our hoses all ran here. This is a nice big radius. This is probably about 4 inches. As you can see, it's pretty decent radius here. It's not hitting anything, which is great. You still have access to your filters on both sides. And we need to go ahead and install our last fitting. So we're going to go ahead and get this guy put in here. So we want this one looking back, so we can go back and around the pump, back over to the line over here on the frame rail. If you decide that you want to do the top side before you finish this, when you release the fuel system at the top, you're going to get a backflow from your feed line, and also your return if you have it open as well. So we're going to go ahead and get started on getting this bypass here that I put in. So we'll get this guy pulled off of here, and then we'll go ahead and put our line on. Start ahead up at the top here. Now that we have it cut to size, make sure you orient your hose clamp so that you can get to it. Pull this down out of my way for now. Go ahead and pull our little extra piece of hose off of here and slide this guy on. Now you can see that this hose is pretty big for this area. So I may end up actually putting 2 hose clamps on here, and I have done this in the past. I talked about doing this in another video. I'm going to go ahead and actually grab another hose clamp and put it on here. So pull this back off of here. Now the double clamp gives a better seal, and as you can see, it doesn't really want to spin on there, which is exactly what we want. And I think we're just going to put a zip tie right here and hold all these together. And that is pretty much the system installed. I got to clip that zip tie off and then go ahead and put our filters on, and then also plug our fuel pump in right here. I'm going to leave this unplugged for now because I'm going to hot wire the pump up top, and then I can come down here and just plug it in and go ahead and start checking this area here for leaks. Now before we go ahead and do the leak, we have our water separator here. We have our gasket for that. Don't want to roll it up on there. Go ahead. Now we need to put a little bit of fuel on here, and I have a little bit in this pan here. All that does is lubricate the O-rings so that you don't have to worry about being dry on there. So now that we have our filters installed here, we have our water separator first, pump, then your filter here, and then it'll all continue up into the valley. Now we're going to go ahead up in the valley and get that whole mess done. Once we get all that done, we'll be back down here just checking for leaks. So here we are up top. We're finally going to start taking this beauty cover off. So we're going to go ahead and get the beauty cover off and show you what we're going to be doing here, and we'll see what we can get done. So we have all the nuts off of here. Go ahead and lift this guy off. And this thing's actually in pretty decent shape. I don't think the hinges are broken on it, so which is great. And if we can put this back on, I will put this back on, so we'll see what happens. So this is my gripe about the engine covers. You see all this grime? That engine cover somehow creates a vacuum. And what it does is it pulls a whole bunch of crap back up onto the up top of the engine here. And what it does is it causes issues with dirt and grease and oil. And so that's the reason I mainly don't like the engine covers. But we're going to go ahead and get everything apart here. And it looks like we've already got some leaks going here. So it's a good thing that we're working in here. So I'm going to show you the leaks that we have going on here. So you can see this line is wet and that line is wet. And we have this over here that's wet. So this is leaking. Both of the return lines are leaking. And we're going to be replacing those for sure, definitely. And the one line is down here. And the other line is way behind the AC compressor. So we're going to end up taking this compressor off of here. And then also taking this alternator off of here. So we're going to go ahead and get everything out of the way. I'm going to leave the alternator and the AC compressor for now. I'm going to go ahead and work on getting everything dismantled in here. So we're going to start with taking the spider off. Taking this spider off, that's what I call it, it's an intake Y, and get all of this hogwash out of here. Days like today, I wish I had a topside creeper. So this thing's pretty filthy. So we're going to try to not get any of this crap down into the intake. And then here's our little gasket here that would go on the intake side of the turbo. So it's nice that that's whole. And I think somebody's been in here before, so this may be reusable. We'll see how it fits when we're all done. Because this engine is so dirty, we're going to go ahead and put those in there. We don't want anything getting down in the intake because there is a bunch of crud in the engine valley. This is a little bit different than Brent's truck. Brent's truck was very, very clean. We didn't have to worry about dirt. There's a lot of dirt here. So we're going to go ahead and start getting this fuel bowl moved. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to try to take this lid off and get all the fuel out of it. I don't want to use the drain because the drain is going to drain it right onto the floor, and it's not what I want to do right now. All right, so you can see this fuel filter is pretty dirty here, and a little bit brown. Now, the good thing is it's not black. All right, so black is injector O-rings. So if you see a lot of black inside your fuel bowl, inside your fuel filter, you're getting a lot of oil intrusion. And what that oil is coming from is generally your injector O-rings leaking. So we got this guy out of here. So now we go ahead and siphon this all out of here. All right, so we got that all clean. And as you can tell, it sprayed a little bit there. So that container is actually very, very full. So it's a good thing that we didn't have to get any more out of there. Otherwise, I'd have to empty it out. But the bowl is now empty. Filter's out, you can see. And we're going to go ahead and start getting everything for this bowl removed. So we're going to cut all the lines. I'm not going to be reusing them. So this is basically the same process of what we did with Brent's truck. So we're going to be removing all the lines in the back, at the bottom, on the side here, and then get this bowl out of the way. And then we can start on the fuel pump. So something else I wanted to show you is, see down in here, see how wet that all is? That is the fuel pump failure. So it's just leaking fuel consistently. And if you look on the bottom of the intake right here, you see that's all wet. That is all fuel from the return line. So this was multiple issues. We had fuel lines leaking up here, and we have a fuel pump that's been leaking for quite some time. So we're going to go ahead and pop this little cover off of here. And we're going to go ahead and cut these two lines along with the one way down there you can kind of see. And then we'll get these supply lines taken off of here, supply and return, get this bowl out of here. So we're still going to have to unbolt the bottom one. I can't quite get to it with the knife, but we have this one on the one side cut. Our supply line we can cut a little bit later. I tried to cut through it, but the pipes are directly across from each other. And now looking down inside this fuel bowl, there is a pile of sediment down in there. So that's also another reason I don't like the fuel bowls, because while the fuel filter does catch all the dirt falls off the fuel filter and settles in the bottom of the bowl, which can cause you problems. I'm going to go ahead, get this bowl unbolted and get that fitting unplugged or undone down at the bottom. And we're also going to undo our return lines up front here. So we have that line undone at the bottom there. We can go ahead and work on getting these return lines off. Okay, so we got the return lines off of here. We do have the plug over here on the side, and sometimes these can be a pain to get unplugged, so they're easier to unplug once you pull the bowl up a little bit. But we've got two bolts in the bottom here, one on each side, and they are, I do believe, 13 millimeter. So we'll get those loosened up, and then this bowl should be pretty much ready to come out. Okay, you can see this bowl is nice and loose now. The only thing holding it now is it's got the line on the pump at the bottom, and then we have our plug here. So see if we can get this unplugged nicely. Yeah, we're just going to pull the bowl out first. That's the first time in a long time I've seen a hose clamp on the drain. Okay, so we have the bowl obviously very loose here. We can go ahead and attempt to get this unplugged the way I want to. So now that we have this unplugged and removed, we unplug the IPR. And then pull it out. Now, this is a good example of what can happen here. So you see how this seal's all completely gooed over here. This is extremely common, and we're going to see if we can get a new seal for this. But I might have a plug that has this seal on it. But you should replace this plug because this is what they do. Over time, the heat and fuel gets leaked on them, and this is what they do. So with the bowl out of the way here, you can see that there is quite the mess in here. And if you can't see it, now you can. You can see it's pretty dirty in here. And I'm going to go ahead and try to get this line off of here. And once we do that, then we'll be done making a mess, so to speak. So I'm going to try and get that line cut and get it out of the way. And if we can get that fuel pump out, then we'll go ahead and get it out and get the freeze plug put in. And then once we get the freeze plug put in, we can go ahead and clean this valley up really, really well. So first thing we're going to do, though, is we're going to sop up some of this fuel after we get this line cut, and then we'll get this fuel pump out. Okay, so we got some of the fluid sopped up there, and we ended up getting this line finally cut off. So now we get to take the banjo bolt off the back here. And then proceed to make a whole huge mess. All right, so we got the banjo bolt out. It's laying down there, and I'll get it out whenever I get the pump out. So the next thing we got to do here is 2 bolts that hold this pump down in. Get them loose, and hopefully the pump comes out easy. That'd be a nice, pleasant surprise. All right, so we got our 10 millimeter here. Pull these bolts out, set them to the side. We'll see if this pump will actually just lift out of here. So it's coming. See if we can get it out without prying on it. There we go. Now, this is what you want to see. You don't want a broken plunger. There is a pile of crap in this valley. I got to do a little cleaning here real quick to keep everything out of that hole, and we'll get the freeze plug put in then. Here's the mess you're looking at. Now, like I said, I wiped around the hole there so nothing fell down in, but you can see that it's pretty nasty in here. And this is what you're going to end up with whenever you're dealing with a leaking fuel pump and leaking return lines and just a whole bunch of fuel issues. So I'm going to go ahead, get this freeze plug set in there and get this thing cleaned up, and then we can finally start putting stuff back together. All right, you can see down in here that we got this fairly clean, and we got the freeze plug installed there. So now that that's all clean, I'm going to move forward to getting these return fuel lines off, because I don't want to be making more of a mess than I need to whenever I've already installed stuff. So without everything in here in the way, it's a lot easier to clean. We're going to go ahead and get this alternator removed, the belts, and also this AC compressor. We're just going to set it off to the side. And then we have to take the wiring harness across here off. And then we're going to do some fitment here, because I'm pretty sure that the exhaust back pressure sensor here is going to be in the way of our little bracket that I made. So we'll have to do some clearancing with that. But we're going to get all this stuff removed here and show you how we do that. So the inside of this plug came out with the connector here, which does happen. So when you go ahead and put this back on here, whenever you put the connector back on, it'll push that down in there. Okay, so we're just going to take this harness and lay it out of the way for now. It just makes our lives a little bit easier here. So the electronics are off of this compressor over here, and we still have a connection here for the alternator. And then we have to disconnect the alternator here in the back. I don't ever like to pull on these plugs. Try to use a pick to work it out of here. Sometimes they like to not cooperate. So use a pick and pry out on that. Try to do the same thing for this plug here. Then you have a power on the back here, which is a 10. Now this is constant power, so just keep that in mind. So just put the booty back on there, and then I always put this nut back on because I don't want to lose it. So now we can go ahead and take this off, and these are 10, and these are 13. One thing I like to do when I put these back on is I'll give them a good cleaning and then give them a little coat of anti-seize, because you can see how crusty they are here. Go ahead and try to just clean these up and put a little bit of anti-seize on them, because I've had to heat up the bracket to get the air conditioner off, and it's kind of stuck on here. See that? So you can move this off to the side and just leave it there. And then there's a couple bolts for the accessory bracket that we'll have to loosen up and pop the accessory bracket off. I also do the same thing with these bolts, because as you can see, they get a little cruddy. With this out of the way, we'll move our little bracket up here out of the way, and the alternator can come off. All right, so what this does is it lets us get to our fitting here, which is still going to kind of suck to get to because of the back pressure tube here. So we'll be messing with this a little bit. It's going to suck to get it off, but we'll get it off of there without taking the high pressure oil reservoir off. right, so we're going to get this bracket off over here so that we can access the return line that's on this side, because like I said, we're rechanging these return lines out. And if you're going to be doing this yourself, this is something that you're going to have to do on your own as well. And I'll probably end up having to take the back pressure tube off, but may not have to, just to give it some wiggle room so I can get to that fitting down there. Now there's a couple bolts that hold the accessory bracket on, and they are also 13 millimeter. I'm also going to grab a light so that I can see. Okay, so we have our bracket loose here. Just kind of let it fall out of the way. You don't got to go crazy with getting this thing out of the way. You just need to be able to get in here to get to this fitting. Now I'm going to show you why you have to do this. So you have this fitting right there. So you can see it is pretty well buried behind this accessory bracket, and that's why you have to pull the accessory bracket forward, and that's why we also took the AC compressor off and laid it off to the side a little bit. That gives us a little more room, and it also lets this accessory bracket fall forward. So we're going to go ahead and get those loose, and then once we get those loose off of here, we're going to go ahead and start working on getting our regulator mounted up here. And once we do that, we can go ahead and start fitting our lines to make sure that we have the correct length of line. So these are 9/16, and thankfully I have the old Craftsman wrenches with the small heads on them. So this broke free pretty nice and easy, and we can go ahead and just screw around with getting this off of here. So you can definitely see that this line was bad and leaking. So this is definitely trash. So we're going to go ahead and throw this in garbage. So now that we have that side off of there, I may go ahead and clean that up a little bit more. But let's go ahead and flip over to this side here. All right, so now you can see why we had to get this accessory bracket out of the way so that we can get this loose. You can see how wet that is down there. It's pretty cruddy, so this definitely has been leaking as well. And you can definitely see that this is also junk. Now we'll go ahead and give that a little bit of a cleaning down there. So we're going to have to get our regulator put up top here and get it fitted up. And then once we get that mounted, we can go ahead and start running our new lines and get everything set up down there. Get the return lines made up from down here, and then also on the other side here, get those brought up to the regulator. And then start getting our lines cut here. So our feed and return lines, we're going to cut those off and use tube ends. But first we're going to get this regulator fit up. And like I said, it does not fit with the back pressure sensor here. So we're going to have to modify our bracket a little bit and then start reassembling everything finally. So we got our regulator mount all fitted up here. I'm going to show how it fits on here. And while we had some time here, I went ahead and made our first line. You can see it down here. So that'll run right up to our regulator. I still have to make the other side. And as you can see, the tubes are also not sticking up anymore. So I ended up cutting those off, and I put our fuel pump block in. So the fuel pump block is this guy down here. So you can see we have this installed, and we have our tubes cut here, and then you can see the other end of our line here. So the reason I did all that off camera was because it's tedious, it's time consuming, and I wanted to make sure that we were getting some stuff done here. So I'm going to show you how our regulator is going to fit here, and then also I'm going to show you, putting the tube ends on here, and we're going to start making some lines. Before we move too far forward here, we installed this block also on the Lawn Ranger project, and that block is from Marty's. Now, whenever you're replacing anything, including this block or the pump, you got to be worried about these crush washers, okay? So the crush washers go on each side of the fuel line fitting. So one on the bolt side, one on the block side, or the fuel pump side, okay? These guys were heavily stuck to the fitting that has the small metal lines on it. I literally had to pry these off of there with a pick. So whenever you're replacing anything down here, make sure that these are not stuck to the block, because just because you didn't see them when the bolt came out doesn't mean they're going to fall out. So make sure that these are not there, because if you double these up, you're almost guaranteed to have a leak. So we're going to go ahead and start installing our tube ends. Obviously we have a 5/16 and a 3/8 here, and we're going to go ahead and get these installed. Very, very similar to the concept that we did for Lawn Ranger project. So just like before, we're going to put our collar on, put our olive on, and then you go ahead and put your fitting on. Now make sure that that fitting is buried inside here, because if you don't, it can smash the olive in the end of the line, and that's not what you want. So we got our first one put on here. We'll go ahead and move on to the next one. Same concept here. You want to make sure that fitting is buried on there, and then go ahead and tighten up your collar. Now we have the clamp taken off in the back here. I did not show that clamp coming off. However, this is what that clamp looks like. We're going to go ahead and reinstall it back on here. Now I uninstalled that clamp to give me some more room to cut these pipes, and we also sanded these as well and gave them a cleaning and a deburring. So that's the same thing we did on the Lawn Ranger project we did here. It's just a different fitting, but still serves the same purpose. The only thing that we're going to run into here is the fact that we are going to be going straight down to here with a straight fitting. So I may end up having to tweak these lines a little bit to get them to look down a little bit, which is not a huge deal. Now we have the tube fittings put on here. I'm going to go ahead and work on getting this line put in, because that's going to be a lot easier without the regulator in the way. So we'll start with that. So I previously installed this end on this hose, and I will show you how to put these hose ends on, because this is a different type of line. but we're going to go ahead and see if this is going to make it or if we're going to need some different fittings. So we could probably do that. It's a little bit tight. I'm going to see if I have any 90 fittings. So we have this 90 here. We can just thread that on there. And then we can go ahead and just do a little short piece of hose here. And we can go ahead and get this installed then. Now these fittings do take up a lot of room. So we're probably going to have to cut this a little bit short. I may leave it a little bit long so that it can be a little bit of a loop there, just to give it some freedom. So we'll go ahead, mark this out, and get it cut. So what I did was I marked where I want the end of my fitting to be. So in doing that, that will let me do hold the fitting on this line here, and then we can go ahead and figure out where our cut line will actually be. So we have one other option to do with this. We can actually cut this pipe off again and move this tube fitting back, which we may end up doing, but I got to see how this is going to actually react to the bend, and if it'll make the bend okay, then we should be fine. This is a braided hose. It is pretty strong and resilient, so we'll see what happens. So we have our line here, and this is our fitting. So if this is the end of our fitting here, what I did was I held this on here like that, and to see if it would make this bend, which it will. We need to cut this hose where it'll actually be inside this fitting. So inside these fittings is very similar to the tube nuts. So you have an inside piece, you have a wedge. Now this isn't an olive, this is a directional wedge. You can see it's tapered on one side, and then obviously your collar here, okay? So I'm going to go ahead, and this is the end of our fitting with the black mark here, you can see. So we'll put a mark right here, and then we'll go ahead and cut this. So now you see we have two marks. So what you want to do is you want to take your electrical tape and wrap all the way around your cut, okay? So pull the tape as tight as you can, get it to be a little bit tight on here, and go around a whole bunch of times. So we went around this a bunch of times. You can see it's very, very thick on there. Now, the center of this tape is where we want to cut. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut this. Now, the point of the electrical tape is it keeps the braids from fraying up so much. All right, so whenever that leaves you the ability to put the collar on without it getting stuck. Sometimes these braids will want to pop out, and then causes problems getting your collar on. So basically you take your angle grinder here and cut through the line. And this is what you're left with. So you can see the braid doesn't spread too bad. And there's a little tiny little bit of a burr on the inside, so you want to just clean that little bit of an edge up in there. And then peel your tape off and we can start putting the fitting on. So we got a little bit of a burr here. Just take this guy and just kind of like scratch at it a little bit. You can use a knife if you wish. But you just want to get that little bit of a burr off of there. You want to take care to try to not scrape off your carbon line. You can see it's black in there. Then you're going to go ahead and peel your tape off. You can see there that the braid is not all frayed off, which is what you want. This is where your soft jaws are going to come in handy. Then what you want to do is you want to take your collar, put it on. You can see it slips on there. Now, this is the fun part. You want to take a pick and you want to spread these out a little bit. So you want to open this braid up just a smidge. You don't want to go hog wild with it. Now the reason you do this is so you can put your wedge in. So the wedge is in, but it's not fully seated. You want to make sure that you don't get any wires underneath there. Okay? And then we'll go ahead and push it on the rest of the way. So it's fully seated in here. There is an actual edge on the back side of the wedge that the pipe will actually stick to. So now you're going to take your other piece here, and you always want to have assembly lube with these. Make sure you get it everywhere and push it in. So it's fully seated. Give it a little bit of a spin here. Make sure you put lubricant on your threads as well. And then put your collar up on the fitting. Now, you can see it's not tight like this one is. So we're going to go ahead and use our soft jaws. So you want to keep a little bit of pressure down on that so that it doesn't work its way out, because once it's done you can't see in there to see if it's fully seated real well. However, this is our line here, and as you can see, it's very flexible. It does do a pretty good tight bend. So this is what's nice about this line. It's very flexible. It's very resilient to everything. And if you have a good seal on these will last literally a lifetime. And say you do end up breaking the hose, these fittings are reusable, so you can take these off the line and reuse them. Now, for every line we do, we're going to redo this process for every one of them. I'm not going to video all of that because it just adds a bunch of time, and once is a pretty good idea on what you need to do. So we're going to go ahead and get this installed and go forth. So you can see we have these all put together here, and the elbow actually made this a little bit better. So this hose only has to do one kind of little funky bend there. Now, ideally, I would have a tube end that had a 90 on it to shorten this up to make it a little bit better. It's a little bit tight for my liking, so we may end up moving this tube fitting back and putting a new piece of line down through there, which, like I said before, these lines are reusable, so that's a nice little thing to have. So I may end up cutting this pipe a little bit farther back here and moving everything back up to here to give that hose a little bit more of a free play there. So I ended up messing with this a little bit and actually just flipping the elbow down to the bottom there makes this bend a lot nicer. I think I'm going to be happy with that. We won't have to actually redo any of this, which is great. So we're going to go ahead and tighten all those up because we put these in, we'll install them and tighten them up. That way we don't have to worry about coming back and trying to tighten them later. Now when you're tightening on the tube nuts, you want to make sure you hold the tube nut as you tighten your fitting down. So we got our feed line installed. So this is obviously the feed line that runs from the tank. It'll go down into the banjo bolt there and feed the heads. Now our next step here is we're going to have to build a line for our return. That'll go up to a regulator, but we don't have the regulator set in place yet. And then we also have to build a line that runs over to our return over here in the front of the head that you can't really see from over there. But it would be the opposite of this line here. So we have our regulator assembly here. And it'll bolt on just like this. So we're going to go ahead and fasten this down. So in our scenario here, I ended up lifting the bracket up and placing the oil pressure sender wire underneath the bracket. There's no sharp edges for it there. It's actually safe. And then we ended up cutting the regulator bracket a little bit, and it's still pretty sturdy. So now this line will run up here and fasten to the elbow that we installed earlier. You can see that that will be a little bit flexible there so we can make sure the line's happy. And then on this side, we're going to have to go ahead and get the one made for here on the other side of the regulator. And then also we have our 90 on the bottom of the regulator here, and it will come down to the return down here. So we got both of our lines made here. The one thing that I do need to stress that I didn't show before I put that line on was you need to blow these lines out, okay? You don't want any dirt in these, and then you want to make sure that they're nice and clean inside. You don't need to spray them out with anything, but blow them out, make sure there's no debris in them from the cutting and installing process. So before we install this little one, we're going to go ahead and install this larger one. Now I've gotten it threaded on to our tube nut down here that you can't see, and then also underneath the regulator, which you also can't see. However, you can see that it moves because we're using an elbow just like this on the bottom. Now we can go ahead and tighten up our elbow that's on the bottom of the regulator to keep this from spinning. Now that we have our return line hooked up here, you make sure it's not rubbing anything hard. You know, the line is not going to be contacting anything. We can go ahead and put this guy on now. Now we have a whole bunch of wires and lines in the way down here, so this is a little bit more difficult because the high pressure oil line is right where I want this to be. Then you can go ahead and put it on the top here. So as you can see, the lines, they come up and loop very nicely. If you need to do service or anything, you can actually just take this regulator and flip it up and get it out of your way. So that's why I put a little bit of a loop in these lines. Now I still have to tighten this whole top up here. So I'm going to get this all tightened up and get everything put back together up here. And then we can go down and actually hot wire the system, pressure test it, and put it all back together. So before we go ahead and check everything for leaks and hot wire the system, I want to put this in because this is your fuel bowl harness. Now I've already removed it from the fuel bowl. You can see there's a couple plugs here. This is your fuel bowl heater plug. So if anybody's trying to figure out what your fuel bowl heater plug looks like, it's this guy. This is the cause of many issues. And then we have our IPR here. Now you can see it looks pretty roached. So I have a new one coming. This one's going to work for now until we get the new one here. But we'll go ahead and replace all this whenever the new IPR pigtail comes in, because this will be very easy to get to. And we also found this little guy. So that could have also been an issue. But either way, when you're doing your electric fuel system here, you don't need any of these, and you just need these two, which is your IPR. So what you can do is you can take this plug apart. You got to pop this back piece off, like so. Now I have to also wait for these to come in. I'm going to show these to you. These little plugs here, they plug these holes to keep anything out of the system here. So anything out from getting into the terminals or anything like that. So I have these ordered, and when we change the pigtail, we're going to go ahead and install the plugs down here. Now, since we have this all apart, on the inside here of the plug, you have to take a pick and you push it in, and then you want to push on the top here and pull this out. Now sometimes you have to really work with these Sometimes they can be a pain. So let's start on this side so I can show you what I want to do here. So there's a depressor here that you would have to push down to get the pin out. So you just repeat this for everything. So we've gotten the 3 plugs out that we don't need. And I had mentioned that there's this plug here. I'm going to get some of these plugs here. I have them coming. I should have them here in a couple days, but they will go in these holes from the back side. We're going to leave it for now because the truck's not going to get driven too much, but we want to make sure everything's going to work properly. And then you go ahead and put your backing plate back on, and that is the only thing that holds these wires in. And then the plug will also be held in with this back piece here. So then now all you have to do is loom this up, put some tape on it, and then you can go ahead and plug this back into your factory harness, and you don't need any of this. So this is all you need when you're doing your electric fuel system. Now, I've seen where guys will actually tap into one of these wires for your signal source for your fuel pump relay, but we did that already in a previous video, so we're not using any of that, and we're going to be using just this. So we're going to go ahead and put this in the truck here, and like I said, we're going to be replacing this pigtail, and we'll get some plugs for in here for a little bit later. So we got everything done in the valley here. So now I have the pump hot wired up top. Hopefully the pump will run. Okay, so you hear the pump run, all right, because I'm just plugging it in here. I'm going to see if it's going to pull fuel. Now it has to fill up this filter before it fills up, gets to the pump, and then fills up this filter. So if it doesn't pull a prime here within a very short, basically minute here, then I'm going to pull this filter off, fill it up, and try again. All right, so we're going to see if there's any fuel in this filter here. And yeah, there's definitely fuel in there. You can feel it, it's heavy. So we're going to go ahead and plug this back in. Okay, so I unplugged this because I wanted to explain. So you heard the change in the pump. All right, you could hear it go from very, very quick and high pitch to, very low pitch. So now what you're going to be listening for is you're going to be listening for air hitting this tank. So we are on the front tank right now. You can actually hear all of the air come into the tank, and then you will know that the system's plumbed, but we still have to adjust our fuel pressure regulator up top. So I'm going to go ahead and unplug this right now, and I'm going to go ahead up top and adjust our regulator. But you could hear all the air hit the tank, and then all the air bubbles stop. So now we have full lines and everything of fuel. So we can go ahead and inspect everything for leaks and adjust our regulator. So the first thing we want to do is adjust the regulator, because if we don't adjust the regulator, it won't put as much pressure on this because it's adjusted all the way out. So it's only going to free flow at the moment. So we have our pump running here, and we went up top and checked for leaks, and there was no leaks. We're going to check here for any leaks. Looks like we got a little leak here on this plug. So we'll just tighten that guy up a little bit. So it looks like just that plug's leaking, so we'll give that guy a little bit more. And that is the only leak that we have as of right now. All of the lines are nice and dry. Everything seems to be good, so we'll tighten that up and call it a day. We have this adjusted to 68 psi, 67, 68 psi, and seems to be holding okay. So we're going to go ahead and unplug the pump here and tighten up that fitting up there, and we're all done for this. So we got everything buttoned up but under the hood here. Got the intake all back on, accessory drives all back on, alternator, all the lines here, everything's back on. You can see our pressure is still holding pretty good there, and the truck's been off for probably 20 minutes now, at least the fuel pressure side of it. So we're going to go ahead and start this thing up and see how it does. So we got the e-fuel done on my dad's truck here. You can see it started up okay. So this will be the end of our videos for the custom e-fuel. Like I said, we used a lot of high-end stuff with this. It's not just your typical rubber hoses and hose barbs, but this is what we were shooting for. This is a higher end fuel system. It's all custom made. It's fitted to the truck, which is nice. So we go ahead, we run these. These are pretty much lifetime kits. I've never had issues with any of this stuff, and I've probably logged over 200,000 miles on the other truck with this setup. So we're going to go ahead and run it on this truck, and it should last the lifetime of the truck. So I'm hoping that this will be the last fuel system we put on this truck, other than maybe rebuilding the fuel lab regulator or changing filters or changing a fuel pump. But these are pretty dead reliable, so we just keep using these parts and pieces, and we just had that little leak underneath, and I'm okay with that. We fixed that up and everything seems to be good. So thanks for watching, guys. I really appreciate it. If you can subscribe to the channel and view our other videos here. These views keep us going here so that I can keep making stuff like this for you guys. So thanks for watching again, and I appreciate it, and we'll catch you on the next one.